The Playboy Mansion was the site of Jean Simmons' 1983 encounter with Shannon Tweed. Their 2011 nuptials weren't motivated by love, yet he waited 28 years to tie the knot with her. His family was on the brink of ruin and he was trying to hide a scandal. Just found some old movies from their reality. The show exposes discussions that were never intended for public consumption. A controversy around plagiarism engulfed his kid. Legal records from the year 2025 make reference to instances involving female workers. Widespread repercussions await the man who professed to have had sexual relations with 4,800 women, despite his untamed reputation. Jean Simmons has changed over the years. On August 25, 1949, in Haifa, Israel, he came into this world as Chaim Witz. Flora Klein, his mother, had just made it through hell. She had just escaped from her Hungarian home when she was born in 1925. Death camps established by the Nazis. Along with his mother and father, Yohil Witz married Flora in 1946 after fleeing Hungary. They emigrated to Israel in 1947, predating the establishment of the state. They had a painful history, and the British were still in the way, slithered subtly across the future of all things. Nothing had improved by the time he reached the age of 6 in 1955. Money was a major factor in the dissolution of his parents' marriage. He was raised by his father in Israel. He was brought up by his mom. To Tat Carmel on my own. In order to provide for her family, she worked virtually daily in factories, sewing buttons. For supper, they occasionally ate nothing but bread and milk. Chaim endeavored to lend a hand as early as 7 years old. He and a companion would go fruit picking and sell the bounty by the side of the road. Struggle was nothing new to him. Using an army blanket, he constructed his initial winter clothing. Even though he was miserable from the cold, he had to go nevertheless. He frequently sobbed himself to sleep at the house when his mother worked late into the night. It failed to receive less difficult. He was bullied by other children because he was unusual. His mother had escaped hatred, but he nevertheless carried some of it with him into class in post-war Israel. However, he also discovered something else. He found solace in American comic books, like Spider-Man and Superman. He attempted it despite the fact that he was illiterate in English. His command of Hebrew, Hungarian, and Turkish was evident even at the tender age of 7. Additionally, he had begun to covertly learn English. It was all because he was intrigued by the protagonists in those comics. Stories like that gave him hope in a world still recovering from war, when supplies were low and optimism seemed elusive. Despite her reluctance to discuss her struggles, his mother's anguish was palpable. It became increasingly apparent to Chaim by 1957. At the tender age of 14, she was coerced into working as a potato picker in a field by the Nazis, who stood watch with their rifles. As she moved between camps, her life crumbled around her, one family member at a moment, and she wore garments marked with crosses. Words weren't necessary for her to convey it. The times she cried for no apparent reason, her tendency to be overprotective, and her relative quietness. It had an effect on Chaim as well. He must keep his strength at all times and never allow himself to appear vulnerable. Flora also made a decision in 1957 that would alter the course of events. She departed Israel with 8-year-old Chaim with very little belongings. They didn't have any money, no English, and no relatives waiting for them when they landed in Queens, New York. He remained behind, remarried, and began a fresh chapter in his life. His reappearance eluded Chaim. He reinvented himself as Eugene Klein. Television dinners and flush bathrooms astounded him. It wasn't simple to adapt, though. Occasionally putting in 15 hours a day, Flora toiled away at factories in Brooklyn, every day. In his new, unfamiliar environment, Jean had to figure out how to take care of himself with the help of babysitters. For some time he attended a Jewish school, although he was an outsider there. He later transferred to a public school. After finishing at Newtown High, year 1967, it all started when the kids made fun of his speech pattern. No matter where he went, his accent would make him feel like an outsider. However, he refused to let it derail him. He went door to door selling cacti. He selected produce, on a similar note as when he was in Israel. With each slight and setback, he would push himself to do better. The more he read comics and watched TV, the faster he learned English. After then, his fixation with popular culture reached a boiling point. In 1959, at the tender age of mere 9, at least another year before he changed his name formally. Gene Clean, this time. In the spirit of Gene Autry and other cowboy actors, he cast Gene. No longer did he care that he and his mother and cousins lived in a little apartment. He was fully committed to being an American today. The Ed Sullivan Show in particular captivated him. Something clicked for him when the Beatles played on February 9, 1964. Such a life was what he desired. He desired the spotlight and the renown. The desire to experience, although on the inside he continued to feel like the helpless kid. To fit in, he would sometimes mimic the Beatles' accents and act as though he were British. Girls were into it. He was clumsy and uncertain as he navigated the challenging transition to adolescence. Still, his charisma was escalating. Gene worked odd jobs throughout the 60s. Slicing meat was his job in butcher shops. He was the counter clerk at the Delys. He managed to save every cent of his little hourly wage, due to poverty, showed him how to tally up all the pennies. Not even at celebrations did he partake in alcoholic beverages. He saw the drunken, careless behavior of the elder men. His focus was unwavering. That's how he attracted females. He himself said it. While everyone else became confused, he remained clear-headed. He began diligently studying guitar. His obsession began when he saw the Beatles on television. While still a student, he began forming little bands and laying the groundwork for his future. He visited in 1968 the Sullivan County Community College. He earned an associate degree in 1970 after studying teaching, and he taught 6th grade in Spanish Harlem for $75 per week. He was only passing through the classroom. He and Paul Stanley created Rainbow in 1970. The name was later changed to Wicked Lester. They performed in nightclubs while juggling many day jobs. Gan was even employed by a fashion publication. Using the Spanish, Hungarian, and Turkish that he had learned from his neighbors and babysitters when he was a boy, he also translated for a living. However, his spirit resided in music. He recorded some solo tracks under his own name and experimented with various sounds. He continued to send money to his mom, who was still struggling to cope with the fact that she survived and had lost everything in 1945. After that, his story's shocking turn astonished even his admirers. Jean Simmons claims that in 1963, when he was nearly 14 years old, he became a virgin. A little boy working a newspaper route, that was all. He went door to door with a client on a cold winter night just before Christmas. In her response, she wore only a thin nightgown. Married life was her story. What came after that? In his book, he elaborated on the subject afterwards. It was more than simply the start of his sexual life. A group consisting of Jean Simmons, Paul Stanley, Steve Coronel, Brooke Tony Zarella, Ostrander Sr. They came together to become Wicked Lester. Originating from New York City's erratic music scene, the sound was an odd blend of folk and rock. Electric Lady Studios, where they had produced an entire album by October 15, 1972, had been Jimi Hendrix constructed it. Epic Records had spent a big penny to get it done. However, Don Ellis, their A&R director, despised it. He put it away indefinitely because he thought the sound was too chaotic and unusual for radio. Its denial gagged Gan. He had invested so much in the idea, and now it had already failed. In a fit of rage, Paul and Gan let Steve Coronel go, briefly brought in Ron LeJack, and then shut down Wicked Lester completely. It didn't stop there though. To ensure that the old Wicked Lester tapes were never published, Gan and Paul paid $138,000 to acquire them back in 1977, after Kiss became renowned. Their new tough image was at risk if they brought back the old sound, they thought. Nonetheless, further internet leaks of bootlegs revealed songs as Love Her All I Can and She, which Kiss re-recorded at a later date, without giving proper credit to the original band members. Something greater was born out of that defunct band. Compromise had been completed by Gan and Paul by January 1973. Peter Criss had placed an ad in Rolling Stone, which they discovered. With experience as a drummer for groups such as Lips and Chelsea, he moved swiftly to join. After that, an ad in the Village Voice led them to Ace Frehley. All four of them worked together to make something totally original. There was no way this rock band was going to be ordinary. It was supposed to be a fantastical makeup-filled extravaganza. They formed Kiss after being influenced by New York Doll's glam look and Alice Cooper's shock rock. January 30th, 1973, was the date of their debut performance. In a modest Queens club known the Coventry, formerly known as the Popcorn Club. Just 3 individuals, including several of the band's girlfriends, showed up. However, it was that very night that Jean first set fire to the stage. Everyone was captivated by the spectacle. Being without a they gained fans thanks to a single popular song or any exposure on MTV. Not the radio, but fan publications and live performances got the word out. They were the featured act at Anaheim Stadium in 1974 after just 18 months. In retrospect, Jean remarked that the peculiar and memorable nature of their makeup forever etched on people's thoughts. The texture was undefined. It was strange, and it was becoming worse. Jean made the monster in 1973. He began to breathe fire and spew blood on stage, drawing inspiration from horror films like Black Sabbath and comic book characters like Black Bolt. He also painted bat wings around his eyes. He had picked up the techniques from an expert. Without a clear strategy, the band began playing around with cosmetics. Jean chose terror. In the style of a cat, Peter made whiskers on his face. Ace transformed into an intergalactic stranger. They swarmed around the mirrors, attempting to create something completely unique. Initial performances attracted little more than a dozen spectators. On occasion, there would be fewer than 10 people in the audience at the Coventry. Unfortunately, the few individuals that stayed behind continued the conversation. Children were already word-spreading long before the advent of the internet. According to Jean, it was working despite feeling sticky and weird. Frustration became intrigue due to that makeup, fire and blood. And airplay was unnecessary. All they had to do was unforgettable. At the Hotel Diplomat, a guy called Bill Aucoin witnessed Kiss perform in August 1973. He was so confident in their abilities that he assured them they would secure a record deal in just 2 weeks. Then he did it. Casablanca Records, a new label, signed them by November 1st, which is headed by Neil Bogart. Peter Criss nearly tripped over his own enthusiasm upon hearing the news. Eddie Kramer, the band's producer, helped them swiftly record their debut album. On February 18, 1974, it came out. Initially, sales were modest. Despite selling barely 75,000 CDs, the band persisted. They performed at more than 300 concerts that year. The continual touring by Kiss saved Casablanca Records from bankruptcy. Neil Bogart was first skeptical about their cosmetic trick, but as the audience size increased, he realized it had been working. Even without a single big radio success, they were selling out stadiums by 1975. Gann said it was a risk that paid off, as they became legendary. In his formative years, Jean picked up an unusual routine. Polaroid photography became his specialty. Through his sexual relationships. As evidence, each woman was required to display the hotel key. He boasted in interviews about having sex with over 4,600 women and said he had taken about 5,000 of these images over the years. Guests and friends were even shown the images by him. Jefferson Airplane's Grace Slick found it repulsive. Jean secured them all in a container. After his marriage to Shannon Tweed in 2011, she discovered them and burnt them on their reality program, terminating that part of his life. While old Jean never used drugs, his sex addiction was an integral aspect of his untamed stage image. He transformed mayhem into a powerful performance in venues ranging from intimate clubs to enormous stadiums. September 10, 1975 was the turning point. At that point, the live album Alive was released. The insanity of their acts permeated the air, and it was boisterous and uncensored. Fire, cries, and blood were audible in every track. During that year, sessions took place in various locations, including Davenport, Wildwood, Cleveland, and Detroit. June 16, May, the album sold over 4 million copies and went quadruple platinum on July 21, 20 and 23. For 110 weeks, it remained at number 9 on the Billboard charts. Thanks to the record, Casablanca was able to avoid bankruptcy. Neil Bogart was even the subject of a lawsuit at the time, and the label was saved from certain doom by Kiss's success. Alive was a play on words for Slade's 1972 live album, which served as an influence. It proved that everything, the makeup, the fire, the insanity had worked. All of a sudden, they were more than just an odd band, they were rock's wave of the future. Further progress was made in 1976. The 15th of March saw the release of Destroyer, which was produced by Bob Ezrin. He flipped the tempo of the drums and other sound effects, added strings and a children's chorus, and then yelled out hit number 31 in Billboard's Hot 100 this week. Screams and shadows flooded Gene's God of Thunder. However, when the band sent him 15 demo tracks in August 1975, Ezrin made things difficult. He discarded nearly all of them. His revisions included on Detroit Rock City, reworked the score, and performed bass guitar solos. A few songs took elements from classical pieces, such as Beethoven's Sonata Pathétique, with the intention of creating a new sound. While the Alive tour was on hiatus in August 1975, rehearsals got underway at Electric Lady Studios and lasted all the way into January 1976. With every triumph, Gan's ego expanded. Even as Ezrin worked on the audio, Gene maintained his own individuality. The travels expanded beyond simple concerts during the late 70s. They were just spectacular. An era of power between June 15 and December 16, 1979, Gene soared over the stage, while Ace Frehley's guitar unleashed rockets at smoke-belching props. John Elder Robeson, one of their technicians, made these astonishing effects. While they were still going strong, they did 92 concerts around the US and Canada. On occasion were underwhelming, similar to the postponed concerts in the Pontiac Silverdome and the reduced engagements in Los Angeles. Peter Criss was having difficulty. His substance abuse worsened. Substituting drums mid-performance for an outburst, he began wrecking shows. It was labeled as self-destruction by Gene. It was obvious that the original band was disbanding by their last performance in Toledo on December 16, 1979. Disco had infiltrated their music, and fans could feel the change. Concert-goers with families began to outnumber die-hard rock enthusiasts. Gene continued to swiftly descending, but the band remained in the air. Stranger things began to happen in 1978. Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, a surreal television film, premiered on NBC on October 28. Hanna-Barbera, the same folks that made Scooby-Doo, were also involved in its production. Kiss staged a battle as superheroes, slugging it out a villainous creator set in an amusement park. Echoing his actual aim to make Kiss a worldwide brand, Gene improvised words about dominating the world. Many viewers felt strongly that the acting was subpar. The remainder of the band attempted to act as if nothing had transpired, but Gan relished the spotlight. No one on site could bring up the humiliating film again after it had screened. Despite this, it gained cult classic status, particularly in Europe, where it was rechristened Attack of the Phantoms. It was clear from the start that Gene's ego was enormous. It was unstoppable. Separate albums by each of the 4 members were released on September 18 of that year. Gene's album was more successful than other of Kiss's group albums. Guest appearances by Cher and Bob Seger were among the unusual covers that were included, such as When You Wish Upon a Star. Radioactivity was a theme in his music and Bizarre Dreams. I Was Made for Love in You, the lead single from Kiss's 1979 album Dynasty, peaked at #11 on Billboard's Hot 100 on May 23.
With over 1 million copies sold, it achieved platinum status in 5 different countries. Their reputation took a hit due to the disco era. Sales of rock concert tickets plummeted as people fled the scene. Places were squeezed. Perfection was slipping away. After contributing to just one tune, Peter Criss decided to call it quits. Splits had formed in the fissures. What Kiss accomplished on September 18, 1983, was unfathomable. On MTV, they removed their makeup in real time. They came clean about who they were after a decade of secrecy. Simultaneously, they released Lick It Up, which sold over 1 million copies and went platinum. It sounded more powerful, unfiltered, and confrontational. Sales increased, and admirers returned, proving that the bet paid off. For Jean, it was a new beginning. Kiss was raking in millions of dollars in merchandise by that point, with over 100 licensed items, ranging from lunchboxes to action figurines. Despite the disappearance of the masks, commerce was thriving. Gan went on a hiatus in 1984, before venturing into the film industry in Hollywood. In Michael Kittion's sci-fi thriller Runaway, he portrayed the antagonist Luther. Drawing on his demon persona, Gan delivered lines with dramatic flair before dying at the hands of his own creations, killer robots, because he was a crazy scientist who used them to slaughter people. As for Peter Criss, he's back in the band. Had lost his job in 1980 due to an unmanageable addiction. Gan referred to it as an essential amputation. Eric Carr took over as the Fox, the band's new drummer. Although it was a devastating loss, it allowed them to begin anew. The year 1989 was debuted at number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 with the ballad Forever, which was included on Hot in the Shade. Their biggest success during the Sans makeup years, it sold over 500,000 copies. The music though was gentle and lovely, rather than defiant. Suspects were perplexed, although the sales reps disagreed. Jean continued to pursue women in the background. The band's activity was interrupted by his affairs. Workshops were skipped by him. Over practices, he chose Hollywood. While doing his final album before passing away in 1991, Little Caesar included his debut solo voice. Everything was almost ripped apart by Jean's diversions. Jean came clean in his memoirs Kiss and Makeup, published in 2001. A total of 4,800 women have been intimate with him during his playing in a band. The late 1970s were the source of one of the most outlandish tales. He dated Cher from 1979 to 1980 before developing feelings for Diana Ross, who was her best friend. A love triangle developed out of what was first just a Christmas shopping excursion. Cher refused to forgive them. One of the most infamous betrayals in rock and roll history, the incident went viral in People magazine. Despite remaining friendly with both ladies, Jean's relationship took a permanent hit. Subsequently, the most enormous twist occurred. There was a former members of Kiss got back together, Makeup was brought back. Every single show was a smashing success, with 92 performances and 1 sale. They hit 75 cities. £2 million in tickets. It was a $143 million success. Secretly though, tensions were running high. Gan and Paul received $110,000 plus profits, while Frehley and Criss received $80,000 in flat fees per concert. Then came the lawsuits. The past resurfaced. There was genuine success, however issues were also present. They were falling apart once again, even as they set new records. Jean Simmons allowed cameras to follow him in a reality show titled Jean Simmons Family Jewels from 2006 to 2012. His longtime partner Shannon's home life was shown to spectators with a front row seat. Sophie and Nick, who are Tweed's offspring. The 7-season series was A&E's second most popular program, behind only Dog, the Bounty Hunter. The show portrayed Simmons as a more family-oriented and mellower character, but it glossed over his wild history. The following year, 2008, his sex tape with another woman appeared. He decided to go to court over what he saw as a privacy invasion. But the most surprising turn of events occurred in 2011, when Jean finally tied the knot with Shannon after putting it off for 28 years. News outlets covered the nuptials. Though the show's over-the-top moments, such as a staged purchase of an Australian football team, drew criticism from some viewers, it succeeded in giving a human face to a man who was previously solely associated with chaos and cosmetics. Jean's commercial empire continued to expand. A Kiss logo had been pasted upon his 5,000+ items available. Pinball machines, condoms, and even coffins could have it. Brand awareness was high, $1 billion was the sales figure. However, he crossed a line in 2017. Jean asserted his invention of the now iconic devil horns hand motion in 1974 and sought to trademark it. According to his paperwork, it resembles the I love you sign in American Sign Language, but with the index and pinky fingers raised and the thumb extended. There was an immediate backlash. Those who liked metal were in intense anger. Although Kiss was the first to use the gesture, critics pointed out that John Lennon and Ronnie James Dio had done it much earlier. Gan abandoned the effort a few days later, but the stunt demonstrated his extreme willingness to sacrifice everything for control. Difficulty trailed him into on a broader scale. When Jean made an appearance at the Sports Center in 2009 while dressed as a superhero, ESPN cosmetics artist Victoria Jackson accused him of acting improperly and sued him in 2010. By her account, he embraced her and humped her. In his denial, Jean claimed that his metal codpiece was the culprit. Not at all. To clear his name, he went so far as to file a countersuit. Although the matter was resolved in due course, it was far from his only brush with the law. A waitress at his Rock and Brews eatery accused him of touching her inappropriately in 2016. In 2017, another lady also filed a claim along these lines. By 2018, both matters had been discreetly handled. Despite his repeated denials of liability, the cumulative effect of these lawsuits suggested an alarming trend. His wealth kept increasing in spite of everything. Jean Simmons' net worth surpassed $400 million by 2015. The source of that wasn't merely musical. It descended from the heights of Kiss merchandise. There have been non-stop tours and over 100 million albums sold. He teamed up with Paul Stanley in 2012, opened the first of what would become a multi-location restaurant business named Rock and Brews. He was also involved with other strange projects, such as 2017's The Vault $2,000 compilation of vintage recordings. And in 2018, he became the chief evangelist officer for Invictus MD, a cannabis firm. In 2013, he invested in the LA Kiss Arena football team. However, the team disbanded after a few years. By 2025, he was earning 6 figures per show on his solo tour, entirely independent of the whole Kiss setup. At the Playboy Mansion, in 1983, he started dating Shannon Tweed. Former student Shannon, known for his notoriety when he joined Jean's World, was crowned Playmate of the Year in 1982. They continued to build a life together despite his claims of approximately 5,000 lovers by 2002. Nick was born to them in 1989, and Sophie in 1992. Marriage, Jean would say with a grin, was his actions drove Shannon to the brink, to paraphrase Groucho Marx, but he was ultimately unsuccessful. After she called him a pig on Joy Behar's show in 2011, she abruptly left. After discovering his collection of sexual Polaroids, she proceeded to burn them on broadcast later that year. It was a shocking moment for fans, but a shift occurred. On July 26, 2011, Gan asked her out in Bice, and they were married on October 1, 2011. One of the groomsmen was Nick, and the maid of honor was Sophie. Particularly after 28 years of denial, it was shocking and full of emotion. The tension was evident in their reality program. The photo of Jean with 2 models at a Santa Monica event in 2009 was the tipping point, leading Shannon to briefly step away in season 6. During their therapy session, the show followed her as she revealed that she was taken aback because she had never consented to be in an open relationship. At long last, Jean confessed his deepest fears, dedication as a result of his upbringing. Everyone was taken aback when he proposed to her. Over the course of its 167 episodes, the show revealed more than simply their romantic bond. Hidden beneath the fame was a world of anguish and anxiety. Even Jean's tough guy persona began to crumble in 2018. His mom, Flora Klen, was 93 years old when she died on December 5. She had survived the atrocities of the Nazi concentration camps and the gas chamber, and she had also lost her mother. Jean was raised by her alone when her family immigrated to Israel and later to New York in 1958. He acknowledged her influence on his values. On Instagram, he was shaken by her loss. He encouraged others to value their mothers and referred to her as his moral compass. According to his wife Shannon, she was the best grandma ever, and Paul Stanley painted a picture of an aggressive loving. Fans finally got a glimpse of Jean unmasked. The attention was lavished on even his own children. His son Nick was in hot water in 2010 when accusations surfaced that his comic book incarnate had plagiarized the Japanese manga Bleach. Supporters displayed end-to-end panel comparisons and called for responsibility. After Nick apologized and the publisher removed the comic, claiming it was an homage, the backlash persisted. The artwork was considered amateurish, and the copying was seen too blatant by critics. Although Jean stood up for his son, Nick's credibility took a hit because of the incident. As an artist, and joined him on their reality program. More conflict ensued in 2024 as a result of Jean's tendency to express his thoughts without reservation. While appearing as a guest on Dancing with the Stars on October 8, he uttered some reprehensible remarks regarding the female dancers. Rather than his constant gushing over their physical attractiveness distracted him from their performances. For all the wrong reasons, a remark on Chandler Kenny's glasses getting foggy went viral. People wanted ABC to apologize after social media went wild calling him the nasty uncle. Ian Gann refused to give in. He reiterated his stance in an interview on October 10. April 2025 saw the arrival of the fan package. At a cost of $12, fans could become part of the ultimate Jean Simmons fan club for just $95, not including tickets. Situation in which they would serve as his day-to-day roadie. In addition to receiving a signed bass guitar, they would also be introduced on stage, fed backstage, and helped with soundcheck. Particularly in these economically trying times, critics panned it, describing it as sleazy and tone-deaf.